Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Mercenary Historian channel. My name is David. I'm a professor of history, and I'll be your guide for our exploration into all the little nooks and crannies of history, uh, both in American and around the world. Uh, Now, you know what I have to say here because it's YouTube. So if you like our content, please like and subscribe. We'd be happy to have you and happy to have you join us in our comment section where you can literally ask me every question. I'll try to get to as many as I possibly can. Uh, Today I figure we continue our October series and talking about horrible history. In previous editions I did vampires and werewolves, ancient legends and the effects that led to them. So I figured let's round it out and talk about the third classic universal monster, Frankenstein. Uh, this is very different than the other two, whereas both the vampire and the werewolf originated with folk legends and and developed over centuries and mutated over time, so to speak. Frankenstein appears wholly formed, so to speak, from the mind of Mary Shelley. Uh, Now, it's widely known that the story arose from a challenge between Mary, her husband Percy Shelley, John Polidori, and Lord Byron on who could write the most frightening story. A competition that Mary clearly won since her book is one of the best known works, not just in English literature, but the whole world. Now, part of the reason this story resonates so much is because of the layers in the storytelling. Uh, when the Doctor, in an attempt to become God, effectively, creates his monster, who coincidentally he appropriately names Adam. There's a trivia question for you. What's the name of Frankenstein's monster? Uh, he is, of course, famously horrified by the results and abandons what is effectively his child, and then proceeds over time to hunt Adam to the literal ends of the earth. All the while, the monster, who is only effectively guilty of crimes caused by his lack of education and fear both for him and by him, things that could have been alleviated by the care of a parent. He just wants to be left alone. That's right. Most of you know this already, I would hope. The real villain of the story is Victor Frankenstein, the most intelligent man, as he considers himself, and neglectful father. Another interpretation, if you wish, is that the story of Frankenstein is effectively the first artificial intelligence story. It brings us a lot of context and relevance, even today, about the responsibility that we have for our own creations, both children and otherwise, correct? But at the time the story is written, there's a real world layer to the story. Shelley was clearly influenced by all the startling changes that were sweeping the world during this industrial revolution, an event that affected every single person on the planet, along with all the preceding generations. Many felt adrift, lost in all of these concepts and ideas. This was especially true of the nobility, which Shelley was a part of, who were seeing hundreds of years of tradition give way to industrial concerns, something Mary Shelley's husband and Lord Byron were particularly aware of due to their financial issues. On top of that, new scientific ideas were giving mankind unprecedented control over the natural world. This was not done without resistance. For example, when Benjamin Franklin invented the lightning rod, which was a great thing, right? It just kept your house from burning down every time there was a storm. There was pushback from the religious communities in Pennsylvania and New England who said that by creating the lightning rod, Franklin had tamed the wrath of God, since lightning was seen as one of the few real expressions of God's will on earth. Franklin really didn't do himself any favors with his community when he snarkily responded that if I can tame it, it's clearly not the wrath of God. Right? Now, along with that pushback from religious communities, there was another question that Shelley puts right at the front of the story. Just because we can do something, should we? There are innumerable examples of this concept at the end of the 1800s, but let's step back a little further and look at the chain that leads to some of these events. For example, in 1780, Luigi Galvani discovered that if you run an electrical charge through parts of a dead frog, that the muscles and legs of the frog would twitch. He theorized from this that there was a different type of electricity, a specific type in animals, an animal electrical fluid that could be seen as the key to life. Now, this led to a lot of conflict with other theorists at the time, particularly one, a man named Alessandro Volta, who, yes, as you might guess, that's where we get the term volt from, the measure of electrical energy. And after some experiments, Volta said, and I'm clearly paraphrasing here, a shock is a shock, you goof. Dismissing the idea of animal electrical fluid entirely. Now, Galvani's advanced age at the point prevented him from defending himself, and instead he left that to his nephew, Giovanni Aldini. Now, Aldini, in an attempt to prove his uncle right, he truly pushed the envelope of that question, should we? In an attempt to get fresh and more concrete subjects than frogs, Aldini moved his operating theater right next to Newgate Prison in London, so he could get immediate access to the cadavers of executed criminals. In 1803, in front of an audience, he made his most infamous experiment. He decapitated and dismembered the body of George Foster, who had only been dead for an hour or so, and applied electricity to each of the parts before the electrical fluid could dry up. The results, as you might expect, horrified the crowd. As the face contorted and the limbs were, quote, set in motion. Now, Mary Godwin, later Mary Shelley, was only 5 years old at the time of this spectacle, but it was an incredibly well-known and long talked about event. And there'd been much talk of galvanism the evening before her story was inspired. So it's assuredly a clear lineage here. Now, the movie is arguably as famous, or in some cases, considering our modern visual generations, more famous than the book. But even here, we see the influence of real, quote, scientific overreach, as many of the visual visual scenes of grave robbing are inspired by other real life events. Once again, for example, in 1820s, Edinburgh, Scotland, was the center of anatomic study for all of Europe. And thousands of students arrived to observe these, once again, operational theaters and see the autopsies in practice as things happened, since it was illegal in many of the other nations. But this activity led to a shortage of, quote, subjects, right? Since the only legal way to get a cadaver in Scotland at the time was from those who died in prison, those who were executed, suicide, or orphans. One doctor in particular who did more dissections than almost any other, and let's be clear here, Knox is actually responsible for a large part of the medical advancement of the era, but not exactly picky. He didn't seem to ask any questions about where his subjects came from, just that they had a good supply, and the fresher the better, since older corpses were not as good for dissection and tended to limit the audience, so to speak. Enter a group called the Resurrection Men, effectively grave robbers. They sold the newly buried, and even newly unburied, to Knox and others at the school, usually for about £5 to £7 sterling each. And you get more, obviously, the fresher the corpse was. Enter William Burke and William Hare, two day laborers who became friends, and they developed a side hustle as resurrection men. But the competition was fierce, and fresh bodies and graves were becoming in short supply. So Burke and Hare, after a few incidents, decided to start making their own product. All in all, the two murdered 16 people, all by suffocation, because that was the way to keep the body the freshest and the least damaged. In fact, their method of murder became known as burking in popular slang for many generations. And they were told every time they dropped off a body, and the fresher the better, they were told, "We look forward to seeing you and doing business with you again," by the medical college. As you can guess, though, they got sloppy. They were finally discovered, an alarm was raised, and they were arrested by the Edinburgh police. As soon as they were captured, William Hare immediately, like within hours, turned on his friend and testified against William Burke. Earning his own immunity, Hare was released after the trial for turning the Crown's evidence. Burke, as you might guess, was found guilty, and he was sentenced to death. Now, in a moment of eternal irony here, since Burke was executed, he was given to Edinburgh Medical College and dissected, just like his victims. And even more, if you want to see William Burke, his skeleton is still on display in the front hall of the Edinburgh Medical School. So there it is. Frankenstein and many of the events that led to the story, the images that have so seeped into our popular culture. As I said, it is effectively the first story of artificial intelligence, and that's a conversation we are having deeply today. And I would not hesitate to say that our worries about artificial intelligence and our concerns are effectively very, very tied to this 200-year-old story. There you have it. Thank you for joining me. Be on the lookout. I'm going to start doing some history shorts on this channel very soon, like 30 seconds to a minute of little blurbs of history. So be on the lookout. Subscribe so you get alerts when something new pops up. And thank you for joining me. I'll see you in the comments.